Christmas is a season to think about journeys. Most especially the journey we've all heard 100 times of Mary and Joseph from the place where they lived to the place where they would be registered. It was a bureaucratic journey they were on. And perhaps even more importantly, perhaps especially in these times which are given to us right now, the Christmas season is a time to think on the journey into Egypt, when the Holy Family fled as migrants in the dark of night from an empire that wished to harm them, when they found their way toward safety in a nation that was not their own. Yes, it is a season to think on that journey too. That is, in fact, the story we have celebrated for over 2,000 years, and it is not being overly political to simply tell that story again, which we will do in the Christmas season, because this season is all about journeys. Those Christmas journeys, either to something or from something, they feel propulsive. They have a sense of action. They move toward or away with great haste. Someone is always going with their glad tidings or their forthright fear, never at a slow and easy pace, but with great hurrying toward Bethlehem and the stars and the angels, away from Herod and death and the forces of violence. Always moving, these Christmas stories are. Always going one direction or another, always in a hurry to get wherever it is they are going. The stories of the season are propulsive. They compel action to the house, to the family, to listen to the angels, to ignore them, to harbor the refugee, to turn them away. The stories of Christmas are propulsive. They are always going somewhere. And yet this morning, we are actually not gathered in the heart of the Christmas season. We are gathered in the heart of the Advent season, which is in fact not a time of arriving so much as it is a time of waiting. It is not so much a time of acting as a time of preparing to act, not so much a running away from something as a pause between what was and what shall be. Advent has a whole different energy than the end of the month, or at least it should. It's less a frantic hopping of a red eye to make it home for Christmas, and more a 10-hour layover in a place you may not have chosen for yourself. It is a pausing time. It is an in-between time. And while we will get to the journey at the heart of Christmas, the scriptural journey I find myself thinking about this Advent season is not just the one of the Holy Family moving hastily to and from pivotal moments in history. It is another altogether less decisive journey, compelled by that same monotheistic God of the Hebraic tradition. Namely, it is the journey of the one history would call Abraham. It's a journey that's told in the book of Genesis that might not be as familiar to some of you unless, in fact, you heard it over and over again in Hebrew school, in which case I will try not to bore you. You see, the ancient story says that way before the Christian tradition and its gospels were ever imagined, God came to another one that he loved, a messenger of his word. He came to him whom he blessed and who he would bless for generations to come. And he asked this one whom he loved to likewise be a migrant in search of mighty things. As God commands it to Abraham in Genesis, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation," God says, "and I will bless you, and I will make your name great so that you might be a blessing," he proclaims. And so Abram, because by the way, his name's not Abraham yet, that comes later. Abram, he sets out on a long and uncertain journey. He has no idea where he is going, and he sets out in spite of the fact that he is 75 years old. He is walking in the general direction of a massive desert, pointed by the divine, but not at all sure just where in the holy high heavens he is supposed to be going. And the story says that Abram passes through all these interesting places on his journey, and God at no point compels him to stop. He goes through the greatest metropolis in Egypt, and eventually, somewhere in the land of Canaan, far away from any city, God comes to Abram again. And he says, look north, look south, look east, look west. As far as you see, all that will be yours, he says. And the patriarch dutifully does this. He stands there in the patch of desert that God has led him to, and he looks in every direction. He looks back toward where he came from. He looks out over the endlessly blowing sand, and what he sees, as far as eye can see or ear hear, is a whole lot of nothing. You see, it turns out that at God's command, the patriarch had walked and walked and walked for tired feet for years in the desert. He had risked his life and left everything he had known, and here he was, standing by a few scraggly trees in the middle of nowhere, informed that this nowhere, between any place anybody would want to be, was where he had been headed all along. Of all the places the Lord could have chosen, it was this strange little stand of trees called Mamre that God tells Abraham to pitch his tent. Literally, he says, put your tent here. Pitch your tent here in the middle of nowhere, God says, and everything I promised you will come to pass. And so Abram does it. He sets up his tent, and he builds an altar, and he starts living his life there in the middle of nothing. For the first time in years, he is not leaving anywhere, and he is not headed anywhere. He is just where? Here, stuck in the middle of literally God knows what? Not leaving, not on his way, with no angels singing and no dramatic events apparently unfolding anywhere in the near future. There he is, just waiting, wondering, stuck. Have you ever felt yourself stuck in Mamre? Physically, spiritually, in your life or your work or your journey or all of the above, have you ever set off on a path that seemed so important only to find partway along it that the destination feels less consequential than the starting point? Have you ever felt yourself to be in a middle place with more questions than answers, stretching out ahead of you, waiting for something else other than whatever this is to go ahead and start happening? Have you ever, at age 40 or 60 or 80, wondered when your life was really going to start or start up again? And just where it was you thought you were headed back when you set out on whatever journey you were on ever so long ago? I have felt stuck, that is. I wondered when I was 17 how to get out of my hometown, which felt a little bit like Mamre more than a time or two. When I was 24, I wondered when being a grown-up was really going to begin. When I was 30, I wondered when I was really going to arrive in ministry. And I wonder at 40 when really I'm going to calm down and stop worrying so much and be the spiritually grounded person who can model such non-anxious zen for all of you. I wonder these things. Do you wonder? And those are only the safest examples, because after all, we preachers usually don't really preach the risky ones. There are other times I have felt stuck. You know what it is to feel stuck. In grief that holds you and will not let you go, in the silence of an empty house, or the strange disquiet of mid-career when you don't know what is supposed to happen next. You know what it is to be over it. Whatever and wherever it is that you are stuck in your life, you know what it is to be over it and yet not know where exactly you are headed to next. None of us invented this script of anxiety and stuckness. None of us invented our hurt around waiting, around the pause before the next big thing, about the nowhere we may have been led. It is as old as every human story, and perhaps none of us, no matter how successful in the eyes of the world, is immune to this existential ennui. In her 60s, when the famous movie actress Bette Davis was finding that her movie roles were getting further and further in between, Her own, very dramatic, beautiful, existential ennui was so profound that a friend wrote of her, "She is living on coffee and cigarettes, and she is tired of everything." Can you imagine just being tired of everything? And wouldn't you like to do it with Betty Davis panache, with flair and a long-handled cigarette? Of course, I am not really joking. Because like many of us, I have done some real thinking on what it is to feel stuck, on what it is to be tired of everything, on what it is to have that elusive thing called happiness so far outside the horizon you can't quite see it. I've done some thinking about what brings contentment in our lives, what makes us happy, and the one thing you hear over and over and over again in all the literature about happiness is that human beings are happiest when they perceive themselves to be headed somewhere. Human beings are happiest when they perceive themselves to have a purpose. To some significant degree, the exact nature of the purpose doesn't seem to matter. It is the having of one, and a clear and easy way to align ourselves with purpose. Hence, to work toward a goal is itself a journey that involves a measure of satisfaction. To set an intention and to go after it is like the Christmas story. It is propulsive. It is headed somewhere. So goal setting, to run that 5K or finish that manuscript or walk again, to write down your dreams, whatever it is, goal setting is an objective that carries us forward out of our stuckness in the middle place and into a journey we can in fact feel good about. It gives us something we aren't yet tired of. It pulls us up out of Mamre and into the next phase of our journey. And yet, I go too far with the self-helpy practical tips sometimes, with the life hacks and the helpful solutions, because once again I call us back to the story and the season we are actually in. Because Advent is not, in fact, telling us to set a new goal and go after it. The Advent season is challenging us, in fact, to be where we are. In this place we have paused at, between one moment and the next. The Advent season is challenging us to build something, not out there, but right here. And I can be as philosophical and as full of dramatic self-reflection as Betty Davis or anyone else. I can sit with my rich opportunities and my blessed life and examine it under 1,000 lenses, lamenting what is and is not possible in this place or time of life where I have pitched my tent. But it doesn't take much to see just what is possible, what purpose and power and faith are possible for those who do not have the privilege of going just anywhere they please. You see, just this last week, I organized a prayer service and a vigil, and I sat in a Baltimore immigration courtroom in witness for my friend and my fellow leader, Eddie. And Eddie's last name I will not say today because, in fact, he is to this day, along with his family, hunted and hounded by drug cartels in Central America. It is not safe for me to speak his name. And yet, Eddie is a leader that I have had the privilege to follow, along with Action in Montgomery, which is an interfaith power organization that we here at River Road participate in and lead. And 2 years ago, some of you will remember, there was an explosion. There was a gas explosion in the Flower Branch Apartments in Silver Spring. Do you guys remember that? Eddie escaped the building and literally ran back in to save other people. And in the wake of that explosion, he joined together with other people of faith and leaders that followed his lead. He joined together to organize the tenants in the Flower Branch Apartments and beyond, 95 of whom are Latinx folks and residents of our community, to say it is not fair, it is not okay, it is not honest if we ask tenants to live in these conditions. And so many of his friends and his neighbors could not speak because they are undocumented and they were afraid. Eddie himself, undocumented, a literal saint running back into a burning building to save other people. He stood up at the county council and he said these words of leadership and faith, and he said that every person in our community deserves to be safe. And after years in this country with a spotless, not a mark on it record, a week and a half after he testified before the county council, ICE arrested him. He was targeted not for being a criminal, but for being a leader. And in fact, the exact kind of leader we need more of in our community. He was targeted for leading us towards some light. And this week, I gathered with my friends and my compatriots to pray for and with Eddie as he faced his deportation hearing in Baltimore, because for months he has been in custody, behind bars, unable to see his infant daughter, cut off from his community and his family and his purpose. For months he has been stuck in this place over which he has no control, walled in by concrete, with nothing as far as his own eyes can see but the risk of deportation, and ultimately, should that happen, of death. You see, Eddie's not just a literal saint who ran in that burning building and led other people here in Montgomery County toward a new way. He's also a street preacher and a pastor who spent his life in Guatemala proclaiming God's love to gang members so powerfully that they started turning away from the gangs, which is, of course, why the gangs want to kill him, why he needed to come here, why he ultimately found himself in a detention center, stuck between one desperate journey toward safety and an unknown journey toward freedom on the other side. I won't get into too many of the details. Suffice to say, it was a very complicated case. Hunted as he was, Eddie had crossed illegally once before when he was 17, and this counted as his second offense, which meant that the traditional asylum process did not apply to him. His only hope was a court-ordered indefinite stay of deportation, which is almost never granted. And there he was, stuck waiting for a court date. And when the date finally came on Tuesday, stuck waiting on the ruling of forces beyond his control, stuck in the middle of nowhere, stuck, separated from everything he loved. And do you know what this man did when he was stuck there? In jail, he held a Bible study group that grew to over 20 people just during the months of his detention. He proclaimed from that nowhere that the system had forced him into that love was real for every single one of those detainees, and he made hope out of nothing in the hardest circumstances imaginable. He wasn't headed anywhere. He was intent on being where he was and living his values right there fearlessly no matter what. And on Tuesday, when these two bailiffs escorted Eddie into the courtroom, shackled like a criminal, we had packed it with clergy collars. Reverend Amanda and I were right there, along with interfaith clergy, rabbis, and imam, all of us declaring our support. And he was there, still waiting on the whims of others, still paused between freedom and the possibility of death. And I swear to you, I have never seen anything like it. This man, stuck in every way, turned that stuckest of stuck places into his own sanctuary. Through a translator, he preached his understanding of the gospel to all of us. And when the judge asked him why he wouldn't stop preaching to gang members, even though they threatened to kill him, he quoted John 3:16 in Spanish and waited for the translator to be his human microphone. Awkwardly, not quite knowing how to get it out, the translator said something botched and weird like, "And the Lord had devotion to the whole." And Eddie paused. "No," he said, repeating, "Porque tanto amo Dios el mundo." And she said some strange translation again. And again he repeated that one line of John until finally she got it right. Nodding, she said, "For God so loved the world." And Eddie smiled. He smiled. Because even in that confined place, in the middle of nowhere, between freedom and fear that life had stuck him in, he was prepared to live his values. He didn't wait around for a goal over some grand horizon, not even for the safety that would hold him, not even though his only goal may have been to survive. He asked what he could do right there in that stuck place, in his circumstances where life had pitched his tent. He asked how he could proclaim what he believed and live his values. And that is the lesson of Advent. To be where you are, wherever that is. Living your values, not in some other place, but in this place that you are given to inhabit. The Advent season asks for patience, not for anxiously prowling like something caged, not dejectedly declaring oneself sick of it all, but actively waiting with an open heart for what life and love will bring in due time. Eddie, I am so grateful to say, was released to his family 2 hours after that hearing. He was granted an indefinite stay of deportation and given a work permit, and he is building his life and his leadership anew right here among us. He has left the middle place. The pause is over. His journey continues. And as for Abraham, stuck in Mamre, anxious in that place at the end of his journey, which was no place at all, well, in time, in the middle of nowhere, Abraham would entertain angels in Mamre. His sons Ishmael and Isaac would betray each other and fight all of their fights in Mamre. The promised kingdom of Israel would take root not in some other place, but right there. And the middle of nowhere would in time become the very center of somewhere. It didn't happen fast or without struggle. For a time between the prophecy and the full unfolding, Abraham and all of us have to live in between in the waiting time. And maybe most of life is like that. A middle season, a waiting place, where our best and most honest work is to be where we are, to notice what is happening all around us, and to live our values not in some other place, but in this one, not in some other world, but in this world, not in some other lifetime, but in this life, which calls us to proclaim some honest things, even if we are voices crying out from the wilderness.